All right. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us. We're super excited about today's session with Brooke. But for those of you who haven't joined one of our North America virtual mugs, welcome. I hope you will join us again in the future too. We always love to bring great sessions to you all over the country. We'll continue to be a virtual mug since we're for all of North America. So definitely be sure to sign up. In the chat, we have the link to our chapter, so you'll get all of the updates about our upcoming events as well. But before we get started, I'm Natalie Kramer. I'm a campaign operations manager at Atumos, and I've been helping with the virtual mug, I think, for about a year now. Jackie, do you want to give an intro?
Hi, I'm Jackie Potts. I'm working for BombBomb. I'm based in Nebraska, and I was a founder of the North America Virtual Mug, being that I worked too far away from anywhere to be in person. And happy to have all of you here today.
All right, so we'll go ahead and jump right in. Just some house rules as we get started here with the mug, just to make sure that it's a safe space and you can feel free to share your thoughts and different things that you do with Marketo. Just a reminder, there's no self-promotion or pitching allowed as a part of the mug. Please don't contact people without their consent from the user group. And then if anyone shares their use case, during the user group, please don't share that information without their consent. Brooke's going to be sharing all kinds of cool stuff about the work she's doing. So just be sure if you do any sharing outside of here that you talk to her first. All right, and like we said, this mug is being recorded, so just that you're abiding by the mug code of contact, and we're just informing you that the session will be recorded. If you have any questions, there's links here too for our email addresses. So as I mentioned, if you want to stay connected with the Virtual Mug chapter for North America, be sure to sign up at the Bevy site with all of your details so that you get all of our alerts as we move forward. We're planning a lot of great content for this fall, so definitely be sure to sign up. And then there's other upcoming opportunities for chapter members and for all, Marketo users. Marketo, as I'm sure you know, has many great certification opportunities available. Currently the Adobe Certified Professional, the Certified Expert, and then the Certified Master, which is the Marketo Engage Architect. And this certification just recently changed and is now a test as opposed to a presentation like it was before. So I know a lot of people are interested in that as well. And then the link here is at the bottom. We'll share out the deck, after the presentation today, so you can go out there and check those out. And then don't forget, Champion office hours are coming up on August 11th. They're 1 p.m. Central, and all of these wonderful Marketo champions will be doing a live Q&A session to answer all of your questions. If you've never attended a Champ office hours, they're really, really valuable. They cover all variety of questions and can really help you kind of deep dive into different things that you're working on in your Marketo instance. So be sure to check that out. And then there's also a number of other great virtual mugs happening in August. The benefit of going early in the month is that you can still have an opportunity to catch any of these. So be sure to check these out. There's some different champion mugs, the Chicago mug, which I know Brooke helps with, and some other ones too. So be sure to check those out later in August as well. All right, so that comes to the end of our housekeeping slides. So with that, I do want to introduce Brooke Bartos, our wonderful presenter. Brooke is a marketing operations leader with over 8 years of experience using Marketo in the B2B tech space. She's a 4-time champion. She's a member of the Fearless 50 inaugural class, and she's the leader of the Chicago Marketo user group and the Microsoft Dynamics user group. So as you can tell, Brooke is a very, very busy lady. So we're thrilled to have her here. And her latest project, which is what brought you all here today, is that she is working at InvoiceCloud, where she's built a single Marketo instance for 5 brands and 4 CRMs. So her whole presentation today is going to dive into, what she's learned from this project and all of her takeaways. So with that, Brooke, we'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Natalie. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. I am very, very excited to share with all of you what I've been working on. As Natalie mentioned, I am over at InvoiceCloud. I've been here since April of last year. And when I came into the organization, there were a lot of opportunities. We were a late stage startup, but there was a lot of opportunities for some tech investments. And one of our biggest areas was the marketing automation space. So I tried to distill down for all of you a little bit about what I learned through this project, because it's really the probably most unique instance that I've ever worked on. I spent a couple of years in consulting and was in-house prior. And this is kind of a culmination of everything that I learned brought together into one. So for today, I'm going to start out with introducing you to the project overall and how we landed at this solution. And then I'm going to go through a couple of the biggest learnings that I had in the workspaces and partitions, custom objects and tokenization areas, as well as a little bit of a sneak peek of where we're headed next. So to kick things off, when I first joined the organization and was meeting with different stakeholders and interviewing team members about, hey, talk to me about your tech stack. What's really good about your day? What's really bad about your day? What are your points of friction? A lot of the feedback that I was hearing around the platforms was that the current marketing automation systems were the cause of a lot of pain. For one of our teams, it was so hard to use their system that the marketing team was using outreach to do nurturing. They couldn't even use the marketing automation system they had. Other teams focusing on creating workarounds, trying to duct tape things together because our current platform just can't do that. Things that weren't able to grow and scale and flex with the nature of the business that we had. So from that, we basically sat down and did an analysis of what are our different potentials, right? We could continue the trajectory of each brand doing their own thing, different systems, or possibly shifting, maybe moving somebody to HubSpot or moving one group to Marketo and, any variety of different options. But we weighed the pros and the cons, and a couple of the key benefits of moving everybody to Marketo really came down to in-house expertise. So support and knowledge. That also includes the Salesforce team. They support multiple different brands with the different Salesforce units, our IT teams, that sort of thing. It also gave us the ability to have a consistent and consolidated reporting structure. One of the keys to this project was we got to reset for a lot of people. What are life cycle stages like? How do we classify what is an MQL or SQL? What do these definitions mean? And so we were able to kind of level set some of that. It also gave us the ability to have a lower cost per brand by sharing one instance, so that those with a smaller budget still were able to reap the benefits of a far more advanced marketing automation system than they would be able to do on their own. Now, certainly there's always detractions that come with that, especially with some of these groups and smaller, very small teams in some cases. Marketo certainly has a longer learning curve. All of us know that. We've been in there for a while, right? So it does force in some ways a MOPS centralization at the Engage Smart level, because that's where a lot of our expertise lives. So if we do need that administrative capability, we've got that there while we work on bringing those teams up. Now, certainly there was a cost increase. Implementation costs are always high with new systems. There is a middleware integration that helps to power all of this. And the platform in general is a little more expensive than something like a SharpSpring or Pardot or HubSpot. Then there were the considerations. Could we even do this? It's possible. Now, this is the part where I am very, very fortunate to be in a position where I have such an incredible network around me. Here is a huge shout out to Jay Sturgis, who's on this call, and to Courtney Toby, as well as Chris Willis. So these are people who had previously made instances that were hooked up to either multiple Salesforce instances or multiple Marketos to a CRM, different configurations that were willing to take the time and talk through how they did it, how they approached it. And that really spurred the inspiration for this. Courtney's instance is 2 Salesforce to 1 Marketo, all on the custom connector. So that was a great opportunity to kind of peel back the layers and see what that would look like. And then getting the internal resource alignment to do that. So that really brought us down to, what do we do? Do we do a single instance for each brand that is in a place for it? Do we do a single consolidated instance? What do we do, right? So there's a lot of back and forth. Well, at the end of the day, we're marketing ops people, right? So we chose chaos. And we ended up creating a single instance to support 5 brands, 4 CRMs, and learned a hell of a lot along the way. So how did we make it happen, right? The key pieces here, each of these brands was early stage in their MarTech and marketing maturity. If this was something where each of these brands had a huge amount of technical debt or legacy processes, this would not have been possible. All of these brands were very early. Things like life cycle, scoring, these were all still relatively new. These are very young marketing teams in terms of what they've built and developed in that way. And so we were able to bring everybody together, develop alignment that helped make this consistent from brand to brand within the instance. And the cross-functional alignment. None of this would have been possible without the marketing leaders of each group being on board and supportive with the investments in time and resources, the IT teams, certainly legal and finance. There were a lot of key pieces that really needed to come into alignment for this to even be possible at all. And really smart people. As I mentioned, Courtney, Toby, Jay Sturgis, all of the Marketo champions, right? Particularly the lady champions that would jump on a coffee call with me and let me rant through where my brain was headed or what I was thinking through. The community here, a lot of the developer friends that I have, Corey Bayless, Amit Jain, even jumping into the community and talking to Sandy or Jep and picking people's brains along the way. And then our 2 consultant teams, Revenue Pulse, Andy Carone, who's my fellow Chicago co-lead, who's also on this call, and Austin Stevens were our consultants there, and Jay Sturgis from Solomon, all of whom are on this call today. They had worked together to build Courtney's multiple brand instance, so they had that insight to begin with, but really having that strong relationship between each of them already as well was key to all of this. So here's what it looked like. At the end of the day, we have one single Marketo instance. We do have a native integration here. So we are hooked up to InvoiceCloud's Salesforce via the native integration. Separately of that, we have Workato that sits in the middle, and that connects up a Zoho CRM and 2 Salesforce instances. And so all of that all comes together in one Marketo, and we'll go into the details in just a moment of exactly what that looks like in the instance. This is our high level here. As far as kicking all of this off, so we really started this project at the tail end, November, December-ish of last year, and started this out as a bit of a rolling progression. So during the last, probably 6-7 months, the Revenue Pulse and Solomon teams were in there building the architecture, the instance itself, the Workato connections, building and testing all of those pieces. And then in February, we set the native connector live. That was our first piece to get the InvoiceCloud team in there, settled, comfortable. They started deploying in early March. Then we started to roll some of the other teams on, and we would flip the connections to Workato in the different CRMs one by one. Very, very slow test process. Trickle through a few leads at a time, watch and see what happens, see what either goes right or goes wrong. We'll go into some of those fun findings, make some adjustments, and then we could really open up the floodgates. And so now each of these brands is on board, active in there, working on some trainings along the way. But to be able to create an architecture where all of these could function in an environment without stepping on each other's toes, crossing data, there were some really, really interesting things that needed to happen. So in the end, we ended up with 4 CRMs that were powered within Marketo with 7 workspaces and 18 partitions. We also ended up with a very full swear jar. This paid for the margaritas at the end of the project. So, walked away with some pros out of this too. So let's talk about the workspaces and partitions. When I was in consulting and someone would say to me, hey, we want to get workspaces and partitions, I'd run for the door. I've seen these executed so poorly and so terribly and with such poorly thought out use cases that I never in a million years thought that I would choose this for myself. But I did. And of course, every time I would bring it up to fellow consultant friends, everybody else would go, "Are you crazy?" Well, yeah, I mean, probably we are. But so here's what we did, right? We created a workspace for each different brand. For those of you not too familiar with workspaces and partitions, workspaces silo your creative assets, your marketing activities, all of that. And then you can assign what partitions, which is a breakdown of your database, are accessible by the workspaces. So for us, the workspaces are broken out by each brand. This helps them keep their creative assets separate. So each group is able to go in there, work on their branding, execute their campaigns, and it's nice and clean. The partitions are controlling our database behind the scenes. And this is where things get pretty interesting. One of the biggest considerations going into this was that a lot of feedback from people who have done projects with multiples is that in many cases, they go the route of doing, allowing duplicates in the system. But when you do allow duplicates, it creates a tremendous amount of additional work and mess. And we wanted to avoid that. So as we started talking through the different scenarios of how do we potentially do this, there was just enough overlap in our system that we had to figure something out, or we were going to end up in this duplicate scenario. So what we created was the different scenarios of potential overlap. So InvoiceCloud, they exist solely there. They exist in InvoiceCloud and Donor Drive, InvoiceCloud and HP, InvoiceCloud and IVR, in every different scenario. This is just a glimpse of what it looks like for InvoiceCloud. Now you magnify that across 4 CRMs. So that brought us to roughly 16 partitions, and then you need to have a default partition and then one that has everybody. So as we created that out and assigned it to the workspaces, this is ultimately how it looks within my system. So as people come from each CRM, they automatically have a flag set on their person record that says which workspace they go to. There's also an admin instance or an admin workspace that controls inbound from things where we can't do that, like APIs, but where we can control where people are going, set a flag, then move them down and have listeners to put them in appropriate programs. So it is a little bit complex when you first look at it. So let's dive into how it actually works. So this is our partition routing system. Within our administrative instance, we have an operational program that is listening for those flags as a person's being created. So if they're coming from one of those CRMs and that flag is already on the record, cool, easy peasy. It's set through Workato along the way or set in Salesforce for each of our groups. So then that person is created. We use smart lists to power this. So in each of those smart lists, it's listening to which flags are true on a person. Then we have a triggered campaign for when a person is created. What flags do they have that's true on their record? Great, set them to that starter partition. Then we have those listeners for when a flag is changed. So for example, if a person fills out a form in another brand, that flag is going to be set on the form. They'll go through a shifting process, reassign, and then come into the new partition. With that, we did have to put triggers on all of our programs that are a little bit different than the traditional fills out form, for example, which is one big hang up with workspaces. If somebody exists in another partition and not in where you currently are workspace wise, they can't see each other, they may not enter that program. So we do have a listener for if a person took an action within a set period of time and their partition was changed so that they still end up in that program appropriately. So that's kind of how we control that workspace. But we had a nope. As we were testing this, one of the things that we realized is that we had set up Workato as they were coming in to dedupe on email address. Now it's kind of fun when you have a bunch of those really smart nerds in a room and we're testing these records and we're slipping them through one by one. And you see the very, very first one that goes through and hits a multiple partition trigger and everybody goes, ooh, and you all jump in to dive in and then you go, oh, because you realized you just overwrote all of the data for somebody's record over in the other CRM. And so that was what was happening with some of our test records. So one of the things that we implemented so that if we ever had data mismatches was now when Workato comes over, it looks for that email address. If the rest of the data is the same, first name, last name, company name, no problem, right? If it comes over and there's a difference in first name and last name, it does not update that. We still get the CRM ID for the other Salesforce, but we get a manual flag that is sent to us that says, hey, we have a data mismatch here. You're going to want to check this out and see if this is actually the right person and we should do some sort of a cleanup on this data, or if there should be two separate records and we need to do something. In a lot of these cases where we had a test at test.com or an unknown at unknown.com, we'd wipe those email addresses out entirely because we have sync rules in place that if an email address is not present, those people cannot sync into Marketo from any system, whether native or custom connector. So it helped to clean that up. It was a little bit manual along the way, but after that, really wasn't too many of them, honestly. Once that was cleaned up, hey, we were free flowing. I did say we have a question come in the chat of, do you have scenarios where a person could belong to multiple brands? How do you control visibility to both brands? Yeah, that's where that overlap exists, right? And those multiple partitions, there's people that do exist in both, in more than two, could be three, could be four, could be, you know, any variety. So what that does is the workspace may have access to 4 different partitions that account for each of those potential scenarios. So that way, the marketers that are in that workspace do see all of the records that exist in their CRMs. It does put a little bit of additional insight for some of our brands if somebody is in multiple. And that's where, you know, we may have brands that do cross-sell or have customers that are in both. IVR is a great example of that. It's a voice piece that goes with some of our payments products. And so we can do all of that, but still keep everybody pretty siloed. So it's pretty cool. But then there was the element of, hey, if we do have people that are in multiple, right? What do we do in scenarios where they're in one CRM and another CRM, but now we have different account names, we have different account owners, we have different sales owners, we have different opportunities. What do we do, right? So that's the one that really kept me up at night. How are we going to approach this? This was also the part of the project where I was probably like a poster child for Pepto-Bismol, right? Like upset stomach, nausea, heartburn. I was going through it all, right? Not sleeping. How do we approach this? What do we do? So we landed on custom objects. This was kind of a fun piece here where we went the route of creating custom objects so that we could house all of the data for each brand separately without creating any kind of a conflict. So we have 5 custom objects. Each, as you can see, has at least 23 fields. So we have a company custom object for each of the ones coming in the custom connector. And then we do have completely separate opportunity objects for each one. This is great because if you think about if we had tried to jam all of these opportunities into the typical Marketo opportunity object, if, for example, somebody who had existed in 2 groups had an opportunity in one, but then the other group tried to do a smart list, for example. So they want to query everybody in their database that has an opportunity. They wouldn't necessarily be pulling their opportunity. They'd be pulling somebody else's opportunity. So they'd have to be really refined and prescriptive in how they did that. Instead, it's very easy now for them to just pull a has custom object is DD opportunity. And so they're able to do that, and we keep that separate. It also keeps things very, very clean for our marketers' view. I have blocked out all of the data on here, so can't give you a whole lot of context in what that actually looks like. But what it does is it gives our group a consolidated view of what accounts these people are in throughout all of the CRMs. This is huge for our administrative teams, our sales ops and marketing ops teams, because we know who's where. It is also really, really great for defining parent-child relationships. So if we have records where there are duplicates in Salesforce because we have somebody on a parent and on a child, a good example of this is this example that's typically used by one of the enrichment platforms, where you have, a parent-child relationship that even may not necessarily feel intuitive when you look at it. Now we can see all of the accounts that a person is associated with on a single view instead of just one. So it cleans that up very, very nicely for us. This is actually a little bit of a look of what the Workato recipes look like for how some of this is done, where it looks at hierarchy and can assign some of these different rules for us. Now, as we were building this out, we were looking at ways to match the person records and the custom objects. So all of our people, if they come through the native CRM, we do use the SFDCID fields. If they come through the custom connectors, we have custom fields for each group and each brand that would have their SFDCID, whether it's a lead or contact ID, and which brand, right? So we can look at that. So as we were creating these custom objects and originally building them out, huge big star here for our learnings. We had set up our dedupe fields in a way that caused this not quite at first to work the way we wanted it to. So be very, very prescriptive with the dedupe fields that you use when you're creating custom objects so that you don't run into the scenario that we did. And what happened was, as the information would come over, we would write the information to the company object for a person. So it would look to see, does this person exist? Great, we'll write to that custom object. Then, as a second person was connected to that account, it was looking and it was seeing the account ID, business ID information, but what it was doing was, instead of creating another custom object for the new person, it was just moving the custom object from one person to the next. And so what would happen is we would see people where you could run a smart list and say, person has custom object, true, right? We'd open up that person and you could see in their record where they were added to a custom object, but then if you'd go to custom objects, it was blank. And it was because it had been added to a person and then shifted to the next most recent person. So we ended up having to go in and we made an adjustment to that, changed the dedupe fields in that process and added person ID. So that way it was more of a one-to-one relationship at the person level than at the account level. And then we reran that process and it created that universe for us where we have the different company records and the different opportunity records, and they're able to exist on multiple people in Marketo. So that keeps all of those pieces separate for us. And because each of those are kind of locked within their spaces, that keeps those data points clean. As I mentioned, now we don't have to worry about, hey, we overwrote an account name. Hey, we overwrote an owner, or there's some sort of a conflict when we try to pull in account owner name or email address. They're completely separate. It does require a lot of custom fields to be able to do all of that and house those all separately. But at the end of the day, it has been very, very solid and efficient for us in how it's been done. As I mentioned, Workato is really the key to all of that. And there are other processes that we do within Workato along the way. Things like Salesforce lead assignment is a good example. So we do that process through Workato back and forth when people are created or their data is updated, partition shift, that sort of thing. So that was a really cool one. This was kind of my first time working in custom objects, but really seeing that come to life and how that was applied here for me was really exciting. I got a tremendous amount out of that. Jay, who, as I mentioned, was our consultant at Solomon, was really the one who actually first suggested and kind of did some of the testing with this initially through the Workato process. So that was a very cool thing to really bring to life. One of the last things that we had a little bit of fun with here was really with the tokenized branding. And I say that in the sense that, you know, while we were in here having some fun, a couple of the things that came up were potentials for things like rebranding, or, hey, this is a lot of brands. You know, now we have a lot of templates and assets and things to try to manage. And so we did something a little bit different with how our branding is. Instead of having multiple templates for every different group and having our ops team try to manage changes and updates, we had a little fun with tokens. So within each of our workspaces at the top level, we have template tokens that power all of the branding for each of our different brands. So our email templates and our landing page templates, I have one email template, I have one landing page template. That's it. But as they come into the different workspaces, they pick up the different brandings from the tokens. And so each group is able to populate the branding that they need. If any one of these groups goes through a rebrand, we can rebrand an entire set of assets in a matter of minutes and very quickly flip that over. Now, the one downside that I will caveat in here is if you do use Marketo Sales Insights hates tokens. So anytime we are building something where we are going to publish it to Sales Insights, we do have to pull those values off of the token and actually put them in the email asset themselves before we publish them. So for us, that's really just a couple of, you know, newsletters a month, maybe an invitation to a webinar, something like that. It's not anything that's too drastic, and it's pretty easy for us to be able to just grab the token value. Usually it's like a button color and drop that into the global variables in the email. So it's very little lift for us in terms of additional workload when we do have to do that. But the ability to be able to do the very, very quick rebrands as those potentially do come up is something that for us is a key to the efficiency for it. Barry, great question. How do you handle unsubscribes from the various brands, or do they honor each other's? Yeah, so this is another piece that we did within our system. There are custom unsubscribe fields for each brand so that, for example, somebody could unsubscribe from HealthPay, but still get emails from DonorDrive or InvoiceCloud. Within this tokens piece, there is a token for each brand that drives to their unique unsubscribe pages. That is also set up in a way that Marketo recognizes it as if it was a native unsubscribe field with that tokenization. So we don't have the Marketo default language at the top, but that tokenization pulls in that value, and they'd go, for example, to the InvoiceCloud unsubscribe page, and then they would have InvoiceCloud's preferences of webinar, newsletter, product updates, that sort of thing. Or if the email came out of DonorDrive, it would go to DonorDrive's unsubscribe page, and they would have those. It's something that our teams have to be very, very diligent about. Anytime we send an email communication, we have a master suppression list that has to be included on all sends. And that is because within that master suppression, we do have the unsubscribes for each brand, the typical block list, or if we're blocking internals, certain companies, that sort of thing. They just have to be very diligent about putting that on there, because with a custom unsubscribe field, if you do forget that, you're not honoring unsubscribes. And so it does create just a potential, slight potential for risk. This is also why right now, as our teams are still getting comfortable with the instance, we do have we do have checks and balances, and we will continue to have that, where the person who builds is not the person who is able to send. It does have to have QA from a second set of eyes to make sure that everything has been checked across those boxes. Awesome. How do you handle brand specific scoring? Yeah, same deal. We have separate scoring models for each brand. They each have their own custom score fields. So that way they can operate separately in that regard. Scoring and life cycle both are separate for each of these brands with different models built out, different scoring values. That's because we do have different personas that we target here. When we were building this, there was a lot of alignment in terms of just the generic score values. So, hey, we're going to count a form fill as 30 points. We're going to count an event as, 50. I'm just making stuff up off the top of my head. Where a lot of that stuff was very generic. And then we would have, hey, here are our target personas. So there's probably about 80% alignment across the groups, so that way when we talk about like a scored MQL, we are speaking the same language, even if the exact things like job title and industry may be scored differently by each group. We do pump those into different scores so that somebody's score behaviorally can be different for each brand based on what they're engaging with or their demographic and fit scores. So we do have those where it can kind of go in any direction there. There's a lot of flexibility. So what's next? Yeah. Well, as I mentioned, having this kind of a setup, it really allows for the consistent support of a growing and changing organization. As we were starting this project, with multiple brands, there's always talk of, hey, are we going to have groups that are going to merge together? Are we going to keep them separate forever? Are we going to have sales forces that are going to merge? Are they going to stay separate forever? What happens if we acquire somebody? What happens if we spin somebody off? All the different scenarios, right? There's 1,000 different things could happen. One of the things about this setup is if, for example, we were to acquire another brand, if they hit the criteria of the rest of the groups where they're early stage maturity, we could very easily replicate our Workato workflows, spin up a new environment and clone some of the things that we already have and actually get somebody up and running very, very quickly. Now that we have this done, that was kind of how the rest of the project started. When we did all of our initial Workato recipes, we started with one brand. And then once that was solidified, cloned it and made some tweaks to support the other brands on the way down. So it's going to give us a lot of flexibility on that. If, something happens where there's a merge, you just kill off one of the custom connectors. If something happens, say, a few years down the road, because everybody who ever has done a Salesforce migration knows how painful and long that process is. But if we were ever to merge into a single Salesforce, if we merged into InvoiceCloud, great, we have the native connector there. If we moved into something else, we could do a custom connector. Or if we wanted to do a native connector, we could just do an instance to instance migration, exact copy, and make adjustments in the field mapping there and still be ready to go. So there's a lot of different things that we could do where this can continue to grow and stretch and flex. Workato is certainly the central point of that, right? It's kind of this new superpower that our teams have at their disposal to flex and change and integrate different tools and manipulate data. We do some really cool things with that. And I certainly see that as an expanding use case too. This also gives us the ability to look at other areas across our tech stacks where previously we may have been paying for multiple systems in different brands. There's potential for consolidation. So if you think of something like, hey, we've got, 2 Wistia and 2 Vimeo, hey, maybe we do something about that. So there's opportunity to kind of bring some efficiency into the rest of the tech stack and the operational piece of that, reducing some costs along the way that maybe free up some room for us to do some other really cool stuff with it. So it's certainly something that is going to continue to be a living, changing, breathing monster. It's a really cool, unique way to operate different groups within the environment. Yeah, Naranjan, how do you surface insights specific to a brand within their Salesforce? Do you leverage non-native configurations? Yes. So that is something that is in progress. We don't have it fully live for all of the brands yet. That's happening right now, actually. We do have the native MSI currently sitting within InvoiceCloud, and we're working on the non-native configuration so that we can get all of the rest live. And that is going to use the lookup fields that are the custom SFDC ID fields on each person record. Yeah. And that's where I'm going to leave off for today, because I'm sure you all have a ton of questions. So I am going to open it up if anyone would like to jump into the chat box or come off mute. As I mentioned, we also have the rest of the group that was a part of this project is on this call. Andy, thank you for coming on video as well. So, the consultant team here as well, all of the power behind how this was built and put together is on this call. So we're an open book as much as we can be without going into, any deep proprietary things, but yeah.
I do just want to make one small note. We did not assist with Courtney's build. Jay did work on that, but then we worked with a separate project with Jay and Solomon Consulting on like a similar Workato to Marketo second instance. So I don't want to take any credit for Courtney's build at all, because we did not do that.
Thanks for clarifying.
Of course.
I knew you had done one with them, so I thought it was Courtney's, but
it was not Courtney's. No. I would never take credit for that. I think that was mostly Courtney actually working with them directly.
Awesome.
I actually have a question for you, Brooke. Knowing everything you know and everything you've gone through thus far, if you went to a different company that had a similar ask, would you take the same build on again?
Oh, that's a really great question. I think I caveat that with the very big maybe, because all of the things that had to come into alignment for this to be possible, I don't know if that could be replicated again. And I think the biggest piece of that is it's not only the technology, but the people. Every single person within our marketing teams, within our IT teams, within our consultant teams believed in every piece of this project. It wasn't the easy way. It certainly wasn't. But what it meant for the brands long-term and what we could do with it, the potential for that was the part that everybody believed in and was after. And so, some of the other things that are happening right now is this is all hooked up to Snowflake. So this now gives our data science team a much better view instead of 4 to 5 disparate systems with different responses and data attributes and that sort of thing. We have a much cleaner view there. And so where the organization as a whole wanted to go and the belief that everybody had in that was really what made this possible. Do I think that I could replicate that somewhere else? I really don't know. And I think that's where, if I didn't have that, there's not a chance that I would have attempted this or that this would be successful. So in theory, it's great. In practice, there's more to it. Yeah, any hint on how I helped convince people? I spent a lot of time putting together really convincing business cases. With this, there's the financial ask, right? Which was huge compared to where we were. Implementation cost was a big part of that. The time and the resources, getting that kind of buy-in. And it was, a lot of those presentations consisted of like, hey, here's our current structure, right? Here's the feedback. We know that this isn't working, that this is causing frustration. I mean, if we have a marketing automation system for marketers that can't even use it, they're having to do nurture programs out of outreach. That says a lot that there's a problem there. If we have another group that is spending 10 hours a week creating workarounds in HubSpot for things that don't scale or flex to our business model, that's also a waste of our time and resources. And if we want to get to where we want to get to as an organization, we need to do something about that. So that was where we created within that, hey, here's current status. Here's what this would look like if we stayed on this trajectory. Here are different potential options. And those were the, keeping things separate, right? A couple of brands might move up to something different. A couple are going to probably be stuck where they are and just have to deal with it. Or this consolidated option. Looking at the consolidated option, it makes the cost of Marketo cheaper for each brand. It's less to manage for our IT teams, our ops teams, and our SFDC teams, as well as legal and finance. We now have a single contract to manage. From a security standpoint, the IT team really liked the fact that it was one system and that we had things like workspaces and partitions where we could keep that data siloed. And so putting all of that together was kind of okay, here are all of our different options. What's the direction we want to go? And seeing all of that laid out was kind of like, okay, so this is going to be a little bit of work. Now, granted, our Marketo contract is a pretty long one because we knew, hey, we had a significant amount of ramp time that was going to happen here. It's not like we're going to buy into a 1-year contract when it's going to take us 7 months to stand up. So we just kind of looked at that and said, hey, this is where we think the best option is. We believe that we can do this. Here's what it's going to take to get there. At the end of the day, we ran probably 3 to 4 weeks behind schedule, but in a 7-month implementation was really not terrible from my perspective, and with very little cost overrun as well. Each of those groups, continue to support us on a retainer basis as we're still, building, growing, flexing, training teams, that sort of thing. But we were able to get buy-in for that budget, and for the human resources. That's the part where I mentioned, the marketing leaders was really key to getting them on board too, because that means learning a whole new system for their teams while simultaneously still deploying out of another system and, trying to get up to speed on that. So their buy-in and support was really key too. And they were, those initial conversations were like, hey, this is hard. A lot of the things that came up was, I wish I had something like Marketo, right? One of my groups, their power user was a former Eloqua user. And when you get knocked down from Eloqua to way below Marketo status, that's a whole lot of frustration of like, I can't do anything here. I need something more. So that energy and excitement was there and ready to be tapped into and built on. What other questions do you guys have? Training and documentation processes all being developed concurrently. Yes. So thankfully, not all of the load for this fell on me. That's the fun part about having consultants helping to build, is they are also building documentation in the background. One of the things that we have for our instance, every time we do a training with our groups, every time we build out different things, we're recording all of those. And I actually have within this Marketo instance, a sort of microsite. So if you go into our Center of Excellence, there is an unpublished landing page. And if you hit preview on that landing page, it actually pulls up by list resources and links to all of the different documents for everything. Part of that is because some of our teams are on Google Drive, some are on SharePoint. It gives us a really consolidated place for everybody to go. So if you open that up, it'll have a link out to everybody's scoring models, a link to their life cycle processes. All of that is being built right within the instance so that, when somebody comes on board, we have a new person that says, hey, where do I find this? Great, head over to COE and grab this. And then they can go in and get whatever documents they need or links to whatever videos that might be, and have all of that in one consistent place. Hey, Ranjan, I missed the point about why you have 18 partitions across 5 brands. Yes, it is to manage the overlap in database. That is so that we did not have to go the route of intentional duplicates. We could continue to dedupe on email address and have a single record that could exist in multiple at the same time. If they had been just singular in terms of one-to-one per CRM, we would have had to force duplicates, which brings its own level of mess. Instead, if we have a partition that allows for 2, 3, or 4 CRMs, it helps let us flex that. Yeah, if this is centralized or decentralized. So it's in some ways, it's a bit of a hybridized ops structure. We do have teams that are able to build. Right now, especially as they're getting comfortable with the system, very few people in our instance are actually able to approve and deploy. That is just system admins. Those system admins are able to work across all, whereas the marketers are able to build within their own sections of the instance, their own workspaces. Even within those marketers, you know, they, as I mentioned, they can build, they can't deploy yet. Some of them will be able to graduate up to that level once they get more comfortable in that system. So we will have people that are a little bit more admin side, but then, you know, decentralized where some marketers will be able to deploy. A big piece of that is, you know, as I mentioned, some of these teams are very, very small marketing wise. And so this in a lot of ways also helps us to provide resources to those groups where they might not have had them on their own. If it was a team of, you know, a team of 1, a team of 2, something like that, it gives them a little more power without having to take all of that on themselves. But we can kind of, you know, we can kind of shift it. I mean, I've got, you know, people on my side that are InvoiceCloud, but if I really needed them to jump in and say, hey, can you, you know, I'm on vacation, can you help health pay deploy? Yep, got it. They're admins, they're technically InvoiceCloud employees, but they can help over there. And same thing, we have other consultants too that have worked across the different workspaces where, you know, they might technically be an InvoiceCloud consultant, but they might put in 2 hours over here to help deploy somebody's campaigns and provide coverage because they're trained across all of the instance. It's just skinned a little bit differently for each workspace.
Awesome. Well, I think we have about 5 minutes left, maybe time for one more question if someone has one. Otherwise, we can wrap up and thank Brooke for her time today. All right. Well, thank you so much, Brooke. This was amazing. And with what you were sharing and so many questions. And we really appreciate you joining us today. So thank you so much. Before everyone starts dropping off, though, I'm going to stop the recording.